This is Mike. It is March 13th, 2020, Friday the 13th, and we got a good one here today. I'm going to talk about, I'm going to start with coronavirus, which is, it's a big deal right now. And we're just going to go down some really strange paths. So hold on, hold on. I'll do my best to tie it all together. So I want to begin with the Joe Rogan experience. I'm familiar with the podcast. Like I know it's like one of the biggest podcasts which is out there, and I've seen parts of it before, but I've never actually listened to it. But it's certainly been on my radar. Anytime there is something which has a great deal of influence on the consciousness of a large amount of people, that I pay attention to it. So right now, the big story is the coronavirus, and my personal opinion is, I'm waiting and seeing. If you've been in this game long enough, you've probably gone down a lot of paths where you something was sold or you thought was going to be the the event, and it turns out not to be. So I mean. Whether that's Comet Ison or whether that's SARS or anything like that, once you've been down that, or 2012, once you've been down that a couple times, you get to become a little bit suspicious. And I follow the work of John Rappaport, who does a really, really good job at explaining how stories like this can be crafted and created and are. And he knows a lot about the issues within the medical industry, and so he can break it down very, very well. And I recommend, as you consume whatever information, you take lots of different perspectives, and I think he offers a great perspective. But anyway, that's my thought on this. But I did know that this is different, whether or not it's just being like sold differently, or if truly it is different, in terms of like its effect on human life. We'll wait and see. But it's different just in the fact that they're really quarantining places, and there's like there's this is the population is responding in a more obvious way and in a stronger way than they have in the past. So that in itself, it's different. You know that, and we'll wait and see to what degree. But what I found was interesting was two friends of mine, uh, relatively normal, normal thinkers, uh, um, mainstream in their thought, but with a healthy degree of suspect. I don't think near, my opinion, not nearly enough suspect of what comes from mainstream news sources. But two of my friends, whose opinions I am interested in and I respect, they both made reference to a recent Joe Rogan podcast where he had an expert on the coronavirus. And I did not anticipate either one of these two people to respond the way they did. So I was like, all right, let me go check and see what this thing's about. So that's where we're going to begin this. What's the guy's name? Michael Osterholm. And March 10th was when this podcast was released. And so I guess a little bit about this Osterholm guy. I mean, I watched. Let's see, that's a little bit better. Yeah, there we go. I watched probably about 25 minutes of the interview before I couldn't watch anymore. And I mean, my initial thoughts was this guy's straight out of central casting. He's playing the role he's supposed to play, and in my opinion, Joe Rogan's doing what Joe Rogan's supposed to do. Whether or not these guys realize, whether they're in on it, I don't know. Whether they're just doing what they naturally do well and are being played by um, one level up. I don't know, but what's certain is this Osterholm is an insider. Two really strong indications is one, he's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and you don't get into that without being without demonstrating your proficiency in your area of work or of focus, and then also probably that your beliefs are very much in line with the beliefs of Council on Foreign Relations. So it doesn't necessarily mean that every single member who is in the Council on Foreign Relations is, a Rockefeller insider, but they're certainly being used to propagate those type of agendas. Maybe I'll take a step back. The way which I understand it is how agendas are propagated is there's a hierarchy. There's a hierarchy of these different groups, and as you go higher up in that hierarchy, the greater the status is, and the less familiar these groups would be. And so probably like towards the top, but not nearly the highest, would be like, your Council on Foreign Relations, your Bilderberger Group, your Trilateral Commission, all of those sort of things. And then like levels up from that would be like the Club of Rome, probably a whole bunch of other groups that, maybe not even have names. But it's these organizations, it kind of like, ideas are disseminated down, and then members of these different groups are leaders within other groups and then within whatever their industry of choice is. And this is how information is passed down, particularly agenda. And, if you go back and you read a lot of the literature that comes from these groups from that perspective, and you listen to the words of their founders, it's pretty clear. So this guy, Osterholm, he's definitely an insider. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, probably was invited to become a member. That would be a huge honor from a mainstream perspective. So like, yeah, of course, you're going to jump at it. Why would you not? It also says that he has been the recipient of 6 major research awards from the National Institutes of Health and the Center of Disease Control. And I don't know I don't know what major research awards are, but my guess is like, it's broken down into categories, and major is probably like a lot of money, and that's kind of the name of the game. And so you could see like he's part of it. And when he talks, like, you just gotta it's he's charming. He tells some funny stories. He may have been drunk. I thought he was slurring his speech. Maybe that's just how he speaks. But so he speaks with a great degree of authority, and there's a real kind of uh, he's very sure of himself. He's very sure of himself. And there are a couple things which he said, which just immediately, like, my red flags went up. And so probably the first thing, this is probably like the the least offensive, I would suppose, is like, he's talking about the coronavirus, and just like how everyone should be terrified. I mean, he was going down this list, and if you're going to listen to him and you're going to take that like completely, that this guy knows better than what anyone else knows, that he's completely right, you're going to be scared, you're going to freak out. This guy's like, he's sounding really sure of himself. But keep in mind, everyone from the World Health Organization or the Center of Disease Control that spoke about SARS, that spoke about some of these other, like, pandemics, which we've been conditioned for decades from movies. They sounded really like experts also. So I mean, time will tell if this actually turns out to be as deadly as they say it is, or is it just the hype? And the hype is just feeding itself right now. I mean, it's you got to see. I mean, unfortunately, people dying on your streets. Like you got to when you begin to see that it's different than anything else you've ever seen. Well, then yeah, it's real. But if you're just getting your information from the internet, there's always the chance that none of it's real. But anyway, so going back, so the first thing he says, he's talking about how serious this is, and he at 19 minutes 38 seconds, he says, I've got a lot of experience in this area, and he goes down this long list of all of his credentials about why all of this work he's done, and then he goes, and I tell you, there is no evidence whatsoever that this is a bioweapon. Says a little bit later, he says, I don't believe there's any evidence, but what he's saying is he's resting on his laurels as an expert. This is under the logical, fallacious uh, understanding of navigating contradictions and contradictions within arguments. This is the classic appeal to authority. This guy's like, you should listen to me just because I'm an expert. Because at no point does he explain why, what one would look for evidence of a bioweapon. But, I'm guilty of that too. Sometimes when I talk about things which I'm very well versed and someone who doesn't really know as much, who hasn't spent as much time researching as I have, I I've fallen to the appeal to authority on a topic too. So, I mean, it is very possible that that's just what has happened. But that was the first red flag that went up for me. And then where is it? Right here, he makes reference in the interview. He talks about how he had a book which came out, he said in the interview, September 11th, 2000, but it says here on Amazon, September 12th. So I don't know if it's a slight exaggeration or, to make it more of a compelling story, but this doesn't exactly add up. But regardless, he is tying in to the collective consciousness. He's tying into their mind, into the listener's subconscious. He is tying in 9/11 to his area of expertise, and then all the things that happen when you anchor, you connect different ideas. So he's tying it into 9/11, and this is where I'm ultimately going to go to is at minute 20, at the 20th minute 45 seconds. He's talking about the virus, and he's talking about how just what it's this perfect storm of viruses. And he says we couldn't have crafted a virus like this that is doing what it is doing. We do not have the creative imagination or skill sets. And so two things. One is I don't buy that for a friggin' second. They don't have the creative imagination or skill sets. I mean, that's the entire nature of a lot of these groups that he is a part of, these World Health Organization groups. If you read his bio, all of these different kind of like medical pandemic think tanks, their entire and he also says his interview, he begins his professional life within bioweapons by interviewing Soviet bioweapon scientists in the early 90s. Like the entire nature of what he does is to go and come up with scenarios of what would be the world's greatest created virus. And what he described on this virus really isn't that like crazy. It's not like, oh, this virus comes and then your head doubles in size and raccoons grow out of your ears. That would be something which say like, we could have never predicted that. No, this is like, this, of course they predicted this. That's insulting to say that they have not, that he could not imagine that. So, I mean, like that in itself, like everyone should be like, seriously, I don't believe a word you're saying. But then, where the marker of where he's indicating what this is linked to, he's like, we did not have the creative imagination. And so that is a very important marker in our culture in terms of that phrase. And so, to give an example, like right now, social distancing, like that's a word that or a phrase that just came out of nowhere. Like, oh, we got to do social distancing. It's a euphemism for quarantine. But I mean, maybe that's been around for a while and now it's like just being introduced and it's new to me. But regardless, like this is like new to most people. This phrase, and it was never like explained. It was just used and everyone knew what it was. Kind of like, I don't know, like 5 years ago they started talking about this thing called the polar vortex. There's never a polar vortex before, but they just throw it out there. And so this phrase, or this idea of like not having the creative imagination, this comes back to 9/11. Remember, he already linked in to his story, with his book. He says like, oh, my book came out 1 year before 9/11, then 9/11 hit and then became a bestseller. So he's linking in that he's 9/11 oriented. He's counsel and foreign relations. He's like, he's in the same circle. So I don't buy it for a second. That's just me. That's my opinion. But this is going to go to some crazy places. But just one more. So I want to tie this into where this is 9/11. So it begins with the 9/11 tie-in. There was a quote by National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, and she said on May 16th, it was like, I don't think anyone could have predicted that they would try to use an airplane as a missile, a hijacked airplane as a missile. That's what she said in a press conference. And that's as ridiculous as him saying, like, I can't imagine that they couldn't imagine a virus that's doing what this virus is doing. That's ridiculous. I mean, there's a famous FBI internal document showing like the Twin Towers with planes crashing into it, like, from the early 90s. It's been the plot of movies that hijackers would use planes as missiles, and apparently that's what happened when the crash of intentional crash of Egypt Air Flight 990, which happened at the very end of 1999. I mean, that's a ridiculous statement. And then the conclusion of the official Blue Ribbon Council to get to the bottom of what happened on 9/11 was they blamed it again on this failures of imagination. And so this word failures of imagination, or phrase failures of imagination, kind of came into the collective space. Right here, this was I don't know. This was, I think, a guy from Graham. I think he was a member of. He may have been the chair of the 9/11 committee. And here it says it's where is it? Mistakes, missed opportunities, bureaucratic incompetence and neglect, lack of imagination. It's this lack of imagination. Oh, we never could have thought about this. Thomas Keane and his fellow panelists cited the failure of imagination, this lack of imagination. And it all comes back to the statement of Condoleezza Rice. And it sounds just like this guy. So, I mean, that's why when I see that, that's initially what pops in my mind. And so it's like, it's, of course, it makes sense. He's on the biggest podcast, and, we'll wait and see what happens, because undoubtedly something is happening. And that's where we're going to get into the second part of this analysis. And this is going to be the strange stuff. This is going to be the weird stuff. So, I want to preface this with my own take on reality, which is like, I don't know. I only know what I can see with my own eyes, what I've experienced with my own skin. But even that I can take with a degree of suspect. So I'm very suspect on a lot of things. I'm open to everything, but I'm also suspect of everything. And so I don't know what's going on. I'm interested in what's going on, but I don't know. And so one of the areas which I don't know if it's factual. I don't know if it's just like CIA bullshit. I don't know if it's if the CIA bullshit is the truth. I don't know, but it captures my attention, and that's the realm of timelines, um, alternative realities, uh, um, time travel. And it's not so much like I'm a fan of it. It's not like, oh, this is really interesting. This is so cool. It's more so like I just got like this feeling that there's something there to that. My sense is always like, how it's presented to us may not be exactly how it is, but, that's a place to begin to think, research, and so forth. And undoubtedly, the events of 9/11, 2001 changed the trajectory of the planet. And if there's such a thing as like alternative timelines and stuff like that, undoubtedly 9/11 is one of these places where like, something happened. Maybe 2012 is another one of these things. But undoubtedly 2012 or September 11th is one of those events, one of those timeline changing, trajectory changing events. And now at least I'm seeing this correlation, this connection between the events of 9/11 and now what's becoming the coronavirus. So again, this is March 13th. Right now, like nothing too major is happening in the United States. I think I just heard like an hour or so ago, the governor of Pennsylvania, the state I live in, issued like all schools are closed for 2 weeks. From my perspective, we're looking at a slippery slope. What's going to happen? I'll tell you. There's even a possibility that there's this push for this social distancing, and maybe that's because everything that needs to happen is happening right now. It has to do with people coming together. I don't know, but hear me out because this is going to get strange. So this appears to be, at least in theory, another one of these timeline type events. It's being tied to one of those, and right now it looks like it has the potential to be something like that. And whether a timeline event is like, timeline changes, or if like now is an opportunity for timelines, I don't know. But I'm just open with some ideas. So let's go and let's go and look at Joe Rogan. Because Joe Rogan he's worthy of a deeper look just by the fact that his show is so immensely influential and popular. And when something like that happens, when you have like a show or anything that really gets into the consciousness of a lot of people, and I'm going to suggest podcasting is probably one of the most influential forms of media because it's very personal. You're probably listening to it in your car, you're probably listening to it headphones, and it feels much more personal than just watching TV. And this guy's like, he's very, very influential. And even more so, like, this guy's got an interesting dynamic, or the group which would fit into his audience is very kind of specialized, probably in like tastes and in age and interests and so forth. So, okay, we're going to go look at Joe Rogan. And, as I said, top podcast. His full name is Joseph James Rogan. And I'll point out this right now. We're going to come to this later. So he went to Newton South High School. All right. So I remember Joe Rogan from the early 90s. I'm 48 years old. I was in my 20s in the early 90s, and I remember the TV show NewsRadio. I can't really remember any episodes. I've got like flashes of memory of like what I think the set looked like, but I have a very clear memory that I liked it. And side note, that would be the clue for me is like, is that a real memory or not? I just have a memory of a memory, but I have a lot of memories that way. I don't know what that means. I'm curious how other people remember. But anyway, so news radio. That's really what introduced Joe Rogan to the collective consciousness. We could see that before that he had a developmental deal with Disney, which I don't think turned out to be anything. And he did some other small shows, but it was news radio which really was his introduction point. And I always find, like, introduction points are significant when looking at a star, at someone who has a great deal of influence and is promoted by the system, whether that is mainstream promotion or more like grassroots promotion, which is what this is positioned as. Who knows? Maybe it is, but so the first can be either like the first thing they did, or maybe it was the first thing that was their breakout hit. It doesn't matter. Like, you go and you look at it. This is an art form, beginning to understand, to be able to really deconstruct the narratives of the of the um, of the hypnosis. That's what this is. So okay, so news radio ran for 4 years, and it was an ensemble cast kind of comedy. And another reason why we want to talk about that is the whole premise of news radio was it's talk radio. It wasn't, it was news radio. And if you think about a podcast, it's basically what a podcast is. So we have this sort of like connection between, like, the irony of Joe Rogan beginning in this, like, kind of, or getting his start, really at least making a name, the first real name he made for himself, as on the show called News Radio. And then when he really became an international name, like beyond, like, I think he was the host of some like reality TV show, and he was obviously a star from that, but like his reach has gone much further now. It was this news radio podcast, if you will. So that in itself is kind of interesting. So here we can see this picture. This is we got Andy Dick here. We've got Joe Rogan. We've got Phil Hartman. For people who remember that, Phil Hartman was on Saturday Night Live. He was the utility player before Will Ferrell stepped in. And Phil Hartman was killed by his wife. He was killed in cold blood. Andy Dick, he's had his fair share of run-ins as well. But there's this character, or this actor right here, Stephen Root, which we're really going to delve into. So first I want to go point out, so this thing about news radio, or this description. So news radio takes place in a radio station. It's meant to be like a real show, like a real setting, not like a fantasy setting. But as we can see right here, plots often involve satirical takes on historical events. Take away the description of it being satirical, and just like a take on a historical event. That's an alternative timeline. What they're describing is an alternative timeline. So just immediately you know that pop culture references and news stories. And then we see this statement here: the third and fourth seasons took the absurdity to the extreme, setting the characters in outer space and aboard the Titanic. So now we're definitely dealing with like timelines, and just stick with me for a little bit, because you're gonna see how this all ties in pretty tightly. So we've got Joe Rogan, we've got the strong influence, we've got the timeline sort of stuff with like 9/11. We see that he was introduced through this program, News Radio, which, if you really want to get dark, there was a human sacrifice involved with it. There was at least a gruesome murder, a sensational gruesome murder associated with it. So, all right, so I talked about Stephen Root. Let's go look at these two characters right here. We got the Joe Rogan character, and we got this Stephen Root character. So Joe Rogan, we see right here that one, he was the handyman. He was like the bottom of the social ladder within this ensemble cast, going across different classes. That's difficult to say. So you got like a janitor, and then you got this other guy, Stephen Root, who is on the top of the class slash ladder, and he is the owner of the station. And we see both these guys. They're both like into conspiracy theories. This Joe Rogan character, or Joe Rogan played a character, Joe Gorelli, which was he was a street smart electrician. It says that he was able to craft his own supplies. That sounds very Jason Bourne like, if you ask me. If you really know your history, the CIA and radio stations, the beginning of CBS radio, the beginning of ABC radio. I mean, there's just a very strong overlap between OSS, CIA, presidents of radio stations. So, I mean, whether that's a nod, nod, wink, wink, I don't know. But like these are the elements that are at play here. And we also see like there's some joking that this character may have been the Unabomber. And so we see this in the Joe Rogan character. Now we've got the Jimmy James character, and it says that he is an extroverted, playful billionaire. What's interesting is Joe Rogan's real name is Joseph James, and here it says Jimmy James. It says right here the name comes from a Beastie Boys song. Whether it came from a Beastie Boys song or not, it is bringing specific focus onto the name of the Stephen Root character. Like nowhere else does it talk about like where the name of some other character came from. But here there's like, there's an added element. Like, hey, look right here, there's something important. And then maybe you want to go a little bit deeper into the Beastie Boys, and like, there's some interesting stuff going on there as well. But but again, here we see like, there's more. This character has considerable inside knowledge of conspiracies and government cover-ups. It claims that he's Deep Throat, and that he was even maybe the infamous DB Cooper. So again, now we're working with this TV show, which kind of has like, these timeline, time travel sort of instances. Maybe not. It's, there's some stuff there. I mean, that's the whole nature of this, what we're calling synchromystic detective work. We're going through, we're looking at it, like, is there something real here? Is there not? How much are we just seeing, connections which aren't there? So you always have to have a blind spot when you play this sort of game. But we're going to go a little bit deeper now with Stephen Root. Stephen Root is an interesting actor. I'll put this here for now. He's a character actor, and he's had a very, very successful Hollywood career. And he's played a variety of some interesting characters. And as you've seen in maybe some of the other synchronistic movie watching, there's this thread which I try to look for with certain actors and certain types of themes within the different characters they play. And so Stephen Root, he's got a lot of connections with like government agencies and suspect government agencies. I mean, we just heard it with news radio, with, was he Deep Throat? Was he DB Cooper? All these sort of things. And so he was in Idiocracy, which, is Mike Judge is something. He's telling he knows something, and he's been telling people for a while. And then we see that he played Chris Kraft, one of the first NASA flight detectives. So now we're dealing with NASA stuff in this movie called From Earth to the Moon. And he played Richard Clark in Path to 9/11. Like, this guy's done a lot of films. Not everything is like this, but he's done quite a few films which deal with some interesting government agencies. I also find it interesting that he played a Klingon. But the character which I find most interesting is from the movie what is it called? The Men Who Stare at Goats. And so, do I have this on here that it says that he's in here? No, I don't think I cut that out. But this here, Stephen Root as Gus Lacey. This is from this piece right here is from the Men That Stare at Goats Wikipedia page. And if you're not familiar with that book or movie, it's kind of like a semi-fictional account of the NSA's remote viewing program. And the Stephen Root plays Gus Lacey, who's based upon two different real-life people. One, this Guy Savelli, and two, this Lynn Buchanan. So now you go and you look at Guy Savelli. Guy Savelli is a martial artist, a teacher, a spiritual healer. He's also special forces, and he's like really involved with like mind sciences and this, how do I pronounce that word? Psychical Research Institute of Duke University, the parapsychology department of JFK University. I mean, that's if you know Joe Rogan, like he's a jiu-jitsu black belt. He's an announcer for UFC. He's this martial artist, spiritual healer. He's always talking about like he first became famous with his talk of utilizing different substances to expand consciousness. I mean, this is Joe Rogan, and remember, like just a strange connection that Jimmy James, you know, is the name of the Stephen Root character. You got Joe Rogan's real name is Joseph James, and they're telling you pay attention to the dude's name, like that's something. So okay, so we've got Stephen Root. He's played all these interesting characters. There's this hint. There's something going on. But there's one character in particular I want to bring your awareness to, and this is what I've been leading this all up to, and it is Stephen Root as Hawthorne Abdenson in The Man in the High Castle. And so The Man in the High Castle is this TV miniseries. Where is it? It was made, I think, for HBO, or no, it says Amazon Studios. And it is an alternative history in a parallel universe where the Axis powers win World War II. And this is based upon a Philip K. Dick novel. And so if you know anything about Philip K. Dick, like his books, which he wrote 30, 40, 50 years ago, have been made into movies which have been used in predictive programming more than anyone else. Like Philip K. Dick, however you want to go and explain what or who he is, this guy had his thumb on something. He was accurate, and we know that with the accuracy of his Blade Runner, with his Minority Report. You know, there are so many Hollywood films which are based upon Philip K. Dick books. And so this Man in the High Castle is a timeline, alternative, parallel universe sort of story. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about 9/11. We're talking about all these sort of things, you know. We're talking about how you would control masses, you know, at least that's what I'm talking about. That's why I'm interested in the individuals, the television shows, the movies that have the greatest impact on the greatest number of people, because that's what's driving the ship. So we got this Man in the High Castle, and we've got Stephen Root, who literally plays the character that's referred to as the Man in the High Castle. In the actual storyline of the Man in the High Castle, this is a lesser character. Like, it's not like the main character. It's what as a device for telling a story, he was the most significant, but it's not like he had the most lines, if you know what I mean. And so what this guy did was he produced these movies which were of another timeline, and he was kind of the link. That's the point of which was interest of what I'm trying to emphasize right now, is that this character that Stephen Root is playing is the link between timelines. So now is where we're going to get kind of interesting in here. So let me make this a little bit bigger. This is from like a fandom page of Man in the High Castle. And so within the plot of the Man in the High Castle is this thing called Die Nebenwelt. and it was the goal was to produce a quantum tunneling device that could artificially replicate the means by which travelers were able to physically cross between alternative worlds. So it's like this thing. Like what's interesting about the show is it takes these ideas of, like, maybe they're fantasy, maybe they're not, of how would we cross over into different parallel dimensions, and they're taking it seriously. We're like, this is what the devices would be, and this is what it would look like. Whether it's accurate or not is irrelevant. What it's doing is it's creating an image in someone's mind, so it's less of an abstract and more concrete. So okay, so let's go a little bit deeper with this. So the device itself was constructed deep within the Lackawanna coal mine in the Poconos of Pennsylvania in Nazi America. So that is that's from the book. That's from the movie. Actually, I know that's from the TV show. I don't know if that's what they use in the book. I can't verify that, but it seems like the TV show is pretty accurate, fairly accurate depiction of what the book was. But this Lackawanna coal mine. So where is it? I want to read this. What do they talk about? Okay, here it is. The site was chosen. So this site was chosen in the Poconos of Pennsylvania. It was chosen not only because of its proximity to a rare anomaly, a particularly thin area in the fabric of reality, which would make it much easier to breach into alternative worlds, but keeping the device underground would partially contain the damage caused if the device were catastrophically malfunction. Okay. The point I want to try to make is, like, it's saying that this location, the Lackawanna coal mine in the Poconos in Pennsylvania, is the proximity of a rare anomaly, which has something to do with the ability to go to other timelines, affect other timelines, and so forth. And so, yeah, I know I'm talking about fiction, but what is fiction and what's reality? If you're not asking this question in a very open-minded way right now, you're not paying attention. So, okay. So what is this Lackawanna coal mine? Well, the Lackawanna coal mine is a real thing. Let's go here. It is in Lackawanna County, and right now it's a museum of a retired coal mine located in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And so if you're familiar with any of my other work, particularly about what the hell is going on in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and what I always talk about are one of the first indicators that something's going on in Scranton, Pennsylvania, not just the fact that Joe Biden's from there and Hillary Clinton's from there and the biggest mafia family is from there and B.F. Skinner is from there and like all this sort of stuff. But why is the office there? And now we see that there's this man in the high castle connection as well. And this goes right back to Joe friggin' Rogan, and they're linking this event to like the next timeline event. So let's go back to The Office. So like The Office, I always bring this is what I like to bring up all the time as an indicator of Scranton having to have some degree of significance in the mass cultural mind. And we see in season 1, The Office, Michael Scott literally takes the Office on a field trip to the Lackawanna coal mine. But here's where we're going to tie it all back in together. Okay, so this is the final loop. So we said that Joe Rogan, remember we said, where did Joe Rogan, he attended Newton South High School and graduated in 1985. So let's go look at the Newton South High School. It's one of 2 public high schools in the city of Newton, Massachusetts. The city, it's, it's not It's a high school, right? Here's a list of their notable alumni. I think I read that the school was founded in 1960. It's not. It hasn't even been around that long. So let's go look at this alumni, and we can see like all these interesting people here. You got like this guy, the former provost of Johns Hopkins. This guy here, who is a major player in the World Health Organization. This guy here, Nobel Prize winner. This person here who was I assume is like one of the first transgender models at New York Fashion Week. But not only did Joe Rogan go there, but we also got B.J. Novak and John Krasinski, the two guys from The Office, the two guys from the show which connect directly to Scranton, PA. And Scranton, PA, we know has an anomaly. You got to go back and see the videos, particularly of the Hermetic Institute being located there, and the massacre on Wyoming. There's something going on in Scranton, seemingly connecting. At least they're telling us. They're pointing that it has to do with an anomaly which plays with timelines. And just to let you know, we've got some timeline manipulation stuff going on as we speak. So this is Mike. It's Friday the 13th, 2020, and until the next time.